Tonight, chaos in New York City. A gunman storms a Midtown office tower, 4 dead, including a police officer.
But tonight we mourn for those who were killed. And we pray for the families as they go through this painful moment.
What we're learning about the victims and the shooter.
Plus, as the U.S. pushes for an end to the hunger crisis in Gaza, President Trump issues a new ultimatum to Russia: act now or pay later. And the abortion pill battle escalates, the new lawsuit targeting Planned Parenthood and what it means for the abortion industry nationwide.
And faith on the job. The White House moves to protect religious expression in federal workplaces. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Many unanswered questions, even as new details emerge on the mass shootings in Midtown Manhattan. Good evening, I'm John Jessup.
And in Washington, I'm Jenna Browder. Tonight, investigators are still searching for a motive behind Monday's deadly attack in downtown Manhattan.
As police learn more about the gunman who killed 4 people and himself, it appears mental health played a role in his actions. CBN National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke is following this developing story.
Police have identified the gunman as 27-year-old Shane Tamura, a Las Vegas resident who arrived in New York City just 2 hours before the attack. Tamura may have been targeting the corporate offices of the National Football League.
No words can describe his act of evil, a man who takes the life of others who are innocent. No words can fill the void that has been left by this tragedy.
A series of social media videos and security camera footage are helping piece together what happened. They show Tamura walking alone into the Park Avenue office building around 6:30 Monday evening, armed with an M4 assault-style rifle and wearing body armor. He reached the lobby and opened fire.
We're getting multiple calls from 345 Park Avenue.
Tamura shot 5 people, including NYPD officer Didarul Islam, a young father who had only been on the force 3.5 years.
He loved his city, and everyone we spoke with stated he was a person of faith and a person that believed in God and believed in living out the life of a godly person. He embodies what this city is all about.
One victim survived his injuries and is now in stable condition after emergency surgery. As shots rang out, employees in the building began barricading doors and taking cover. Authorities believe Tamura was attempting to reach the NFL corporate offices and somehow got turned around.
He went on the wrong elevator bank, which took him to Rudin Management, and that is where he carried out an additional part of his horrific shootings.
It was at this point he took his own life. Police later finding a note in Tamura's pocket claiming he suffered a traumatic brain injury, specifically CTE, and making references to the NFL. CTE is a disease linked to head trauma and can only be diagnosed after death. As the investigation into Monday's shooting continues, New York Governor Kathy Hochul is calling on Congress to pass a nationwide assault weapons ban, saying the American people deserve action. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
All right, thank you, Caitlin. We'll turn now to a major development overseas. The United Kingdom says it will recognize a Palestinian state in September unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire in Gaza and takes steps towards long-term peace.
Yeah, the UK's Prime Minister is also calling on Hamas to fully disarm, release all Israeli hostages, and to agree to a ceasefire. This announcement comes as pressure builds on Israel to address a growing hunger crisis in the Gaza Strip. Today, a leading international food crisis authority said, quote, "The worst-case scenario of famine is currently playing out in Gaza, but it stopped short of officially declaring a famine." Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is denying reports of starvation, blaming Hamas for the breakdown in ceasefire talks. Israel says it is implementing daily humanitarian pauses in parts of Gaza and allowing aid drops to deliver more supplies. According to a report by the Associated Press, much of the aid entering Gaza has been hoarded by gangs and sold at exorbitant prices. Here now for more, Michael O'Hanlon. He is the Director of Research and Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Michael, welcome. So the announcement by the British Prime Minister follows France's decision to recognize a Palestinian state. What are the implications of that recognition, Michael, and what does it mean for Israel?
Hi, Jenna. Well, I don't really think it means that much. I see it as a symbolic action. Everyone knows that the logic of the peace process for 30-some years has been to hold out the idea of a Palestinian state as part of an integrated deal. And you get that when everything else happens as well, including the creation of a functional and nonviolent Palestinian entity, not Hamas, certainly. And since we are not in a position for all sorts of reasons to imagine that peace deal, this would be a change in the parameters. It would be front-loading the Palestinian state part and basically giving that as a unilateral concession, if you will, to the Palestinian people. But it doesn't mean that much because there is no real functional alternative to Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Authority over in the West Bank doesn't really have jurisdiction or capacity. And so this is more the Brits just saying to the Israelis, we're frustrated, deeply frustrated by what you're doing, by the limitations on humanitarian aid, and we're going to make a statement.
And we know, of course, Israel is responding by saying that would ultimately just reward Hamas. Michael, I want to ask you, so Netanyahu has been using the military to force Hamas to surrender. That hasn't worked. President Trump recently suggested Israel might need to take a new approach, and that's giving some in Netanyahu's conservative coalition more fuel to push for a full takeover of the Gaza Strip. Is that the next foreseeable move now that it has Trump's tacit blessing?
I don't think so, because Israel doesn't want to own the Gaza Strip in anything close to its current form. They left voluntarily 17 or so years ago because they were tired of running Gaza. And this whole notion of moving the Palestinian people somewhere else is a complete non-starter in the broader Arab world. So I don't see that as being part of any kind of realistic plan either. I think that we're just going to have to keep working harder at the humanitarian aid. I'd like to see some kind of an international armed consortium help Israel to make sure that the aid isn't stolen and mobilize that quickly. Israel's not going to like that because they want to assure all their own security needs in their own neighborhood, but they've done a bad job with the humanitarian aid. It's time to say so. It's time to do better. Too many innocent people are dying.
Michael, in Ukraine, shifting gears here, Russian missiles killed 27 Ukrainians over the last 24 hours, and that includes a 23-year-old pregnant mother. This comes after President Trump, he moved up the timeline for Russia to negotiate a ceasefire. The pressure campaign, though, Michael, at least so far, does not appear to be working.
That's correct, Jen. I agree. However, President Trump is only sort of starting to roll up his sleeves on this problem now, so to speak. In other words, we know how this issue has evolved. He never really wanted Ukraine to be a top American concern. He felt that President Biden got bogged down in that issue and should have just stayed out. Much of the MAGA movement said, let's worry about the border, not worry about Ukraine. And that was the logic through 2024, which then led, of course, to the famous dressing down of President Zelensky in the Oval Office by President Trump and Vice President Vance in February of this year. So it's taken a while for President Trump, I think, to come to the conclusion that, yes, this war does matter for the United States, that, yes, Putin is the problem, the perpetrator, the oppressor, and now the impediment to peace. And also that the leverage that we've had so far, collectively, as a Western community of nations, has not been enough. And so I wish President Trump had come to these conclusions sooner, but I think he's 100% right to have reached all those conclusions at this juncture. And now the question is, will these mild sanctions that we've had on Russia so far, really just Western sanctions, be enough? I think the answer is clearly no. So we're going to have to start pressuring other countries like India and China that we encouraged to buy Russian oil before to actually stop buying it. So that's going to be a big new effort. I think Trump's right to think in those terms.
All right, we're going to have to leave it right there on that note. Michael O'Hanlon with the Brookings Institution, we always appreciate your time and your insight.
Thank you, Kyle.
Coming up, the battle over Planned Parenthood funding, the legal fights that could define the future of the nation's largest abortion provider.
Welcome back. Planned Parenthood's back in the headlines this week after a federal judge blocked the Trump administration's attempt to withhold Medicaid funds from the nation's largest abortion provider.
Yeah, and that news comes as Missouri's Attorney General announced his office has filed a lawsuit against the National Planned Parenthood Federation of America. AG Andrew Bailey says the organization is violating the Missouri Merchandising Act. The suit alleges Planned Parenthood has systematically misled women about the dangers of chemical abortions in order to cut costs and drive up revenue at the risk of women's health and safety.
And joining us now is Sue Liebel, Director of State Affairs at Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America. Sue, welcome back to Faith Nation. So just to clarify for our viewers, when we talk about chemical abortions, that's the same thing as the so-called abortion pill. What is your reaction to this lawsuit being filed by the Missouri Attorney General?
Well, thanks for having me. First of all, we want to thank General Bailey for his courage and modeling the leadership to stand up for the rest of the country and fighting for truth and transparency for Missouri women. You know, for the longest time, Planned Parenthood has been saying that abortion drugs are safer than Tylenol. And under his lawsuit, basically, which is deceptive advertising, you know, we've been trying to say for years that is absolutely not true. But it's a cute phrase. It's easy to say, but there have been no studies that put them head to head. They do completely different things. They're not comparable. And, you know, while deaths from Tylenol may be from a larger populous base, the deaths or severe complications like sepsis and hemorrhaging and infection are women who this is prescribed. So they're just apples and oranges. They're not comparable, and the idea that it's safer than Tylenol isn't true. They say that side effects are rare. It's absolutely not true. We're finding that emergency rooms are filling up all over the country. And one of the things that I think General Bailey claims is that the state of Missouri's Medicaid and other, you know, they're paying for those emergency room visits. And they're also more likely to be miscoded as a miscarriage. The women are told, if you have to go to the ER, lie to them and tell them you're having a miscarriage.
You know, Sue, what are the implications of this case being filed against the National Planned Parenthood Federation as opposed to a state or a local Planned Parenthood?
That's a great question. Nationally, they have affiliate offices and clinics in the states. Those are all affiliates. They roll up to the national. So really, when he's going to the National Planned Parenthood, whatever the decision will be, will affect Planned Parenthoods all over the country. And that is appropriate, and that was the right thing to do. And again, we're really very proud of him for doing so. The entire basis of the abortion drugs or the abortion pills has been just predicated on lies. Even the FDA, when it approved the drugs, it has a black box warning on that little piece of paper that's real thin that none of us really ever read. There's actually a black box warning about its complication rate and the severity of what could happen to women. And so we're just so grateful this is becoming to light.
Sue, in the remaining time that we have left, do you see other states following Missouri's suit?
I do. I know firsthand my role with SBA, Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, is to work in the states. States are attempting to figure out what, with the lack of FDA action, what can they do at the state level to protect women and girls from these dangerous drugs, whether that's enforcing the laws that they have. States can regulate the practice of medicine in their own states, and they're attempting to do so. But when the FDA removed the restrictions in 2021 and allowed those drugs to be mailed without any sort of doctor's input, any sort of medical testing, that's the big problem there.
Right.
So states are doing whatever they can.
Okay. Sue Liebel, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for coming on. Nice to see you.
Coming up, workplace worship. The Trump administration's push to expand religious expression beyond the pews.
Welcome back. Federal agencies must now protect religious expression in the workplace. That's according to a new government memo.
That is right. It marks one of the most sweeping moves to defend faith and freedom for those in the civil service. CBN's Michelle London joins us now on Capitol Hill to explain some of the different changes. London.
Well, John, Jenna, good evening to you. These new guidelines allow federal employees to pray and share their faith on the job. Here on Capitol Hill, it is common to see lawmakers meet weekly for chapel and prayer. Earlier today, senators had their weekly Bible study under Chaplain Barry Black. It was themed The Art of Being a Hero. Monday, Office of Personnel Management Director Scott Cooper sent out this memo, which included specifics like supervisors can now encourage workers to express their faith. It also states that religious discrimination in the federal workplace violates the law and, quote, threatens to impact recruitment and retention of highly qualified employees of faith. In outlining the policy, Cooper declares federal employees should never have to choose between their faith and their career. He added that this guidance, quote, ensures the federal workplace is not just compliant with the law, but welcomes Americans of all faiths. Some critics charge this sweeping order goes against parts of the Constitution, specifically when it comes to separation between church and state. But in response, the White House points to a memo with similar language issued under former President Bill Clinton. Meanwhile, the second Trump administration has also established a White House faith office, directed State Department employees to report anti-Christian bias from colleagues, and a presidential commission was also created on religious liberty. Now, the personnel memo also outlines acceptable examples of religious expression in the workplace, which include having a Bible out on your desk, displaying a Star of David, plus forming a prayer group with employees during non-working hours. A worker can also invite another to worship at their church despite belonging to a different faith, but must stop if asked to do so. John, Jenna.
Okay, Michelle, thank you very much. And for more, we are joined by Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council. Tony, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Tony, so I want to start by getting your initial reaction to the guidance that protects religious expression of civil servants, federal workers. Clearly, this is something that I would imagine you welcome.
Well, it is, John, but it's in keeping. We need to understand this is in keeping with federal statutes and the Constitution. I mean, what we have in the Constitution is a prohibition against a religious test to hold public office or public trust. So that's always been in our Constitution. You cannot be forced to have a religion in order to hold a post. But what has happened in the last, 5 decades is that's been turned on its head, where if you test positive for religion, you're excluded from a public trust or a public position. So this is good news. So what we now have is pagan pride no longer has a monopoly on the federal workplace. And so the constitutional rights of Christians are now being protected. That is good news.
You know, Tony, Michelle listed some examples from the guidance, keeping a Bible on your desk or inviting a coworker to church. I was reading today even wearing a necklace, a cross necklace. These things, were they not protected beforehand, before this guidance?
Well, they were, but they weren't. They were protected under the Constitution, but you had to oftentimes go to court in order to protect yourself. And most federal employees are not going to have the ability to go to court to protect their constitutional rights. And by basically the intimidation and the freezing out of religion of the workplace, that's what we've seen under hostile administrations. And it's not just Democratic administrations. We've seen that in some Republican administrations. So I applaud the Trump administration for this vibrant effort to protect constitutional rights of all Americans. And again, just abide by the Constitution, no religious test, no reverse religion test. So if you're a Christian and you test positive for that, you cannot be excluded from the federal workforce. So this is, again, good news, and you can share your faith, you can pray with your coworkers. It's a positive thing.
Tony, I actually recall the case of the court-martialed Marine. Her name was Monica Sterling, for not removing a Bible verse from her desk. It was Isaiah 54, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. I want to ask you about this guidance. Go ahead.
No, well, I mean, that's a great example, John, because you could have a saying from, some great philosopher, but if you had a Bible verse, you had to take it down. So and it was on a computer screen, if I believe it was a screensaver. So, I mean, I think that's a great point. This way, all speech is protected.
I want to ask you about the guidance that's being met with criticism, as Michelle reported, from advocates for the separation of church and state. Could it, Tony, in some ways create situations where employees feel like they can only advance or share their faith if they share their boss's religious views?
I think there's less of a chance happening now than what we had previously, when we had the whole pride LGBTQ agenda being forced down the throats of federal employees, where if you didn't have a pride sticker on your desk, or that you didn't bow to the pride flag, that you were somehow stigmatized or even demoted in some cases. So I don't see that happening. I really don't. I think it'll be aggressively policed. But I think, again, it allows people to bring their faith into the workplace. They don't have to leave Jesus in the car anymore. They can bring him into the workplace, and they can talk about him, and they can share encouragement with their coworkers.
That's a good way to put it. All right, Tony, we will leave it there. Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council. Tony, thank you. Nice to see you.
Good.
Still ahead, repairing the Appalachian Trail, one volunteer at a time. Next on Faith Nation.
All right, finally tonight, an extraordinary team effort on the Appalachian Trail.
Nearly a year after Hurricane Helene devastated the mountains of the southeast, people are still flocking to the area to help clean up in efforts. A collection of volunteers and staff from the Appalachian Trail, I think I mispronounced that earlier, Conservancy, and other local organizations are making progress on repairing the iconic trail. One of the crew leaders says the project is expansive, but so is the team of volunteers.
Some people come from fairly nearby, some people come from across the country. And this week we have 3 volunteers from Japan who are all involved with hiking trails in Japan. So they kind of set the record, I think, for coming the furthest.
I would have to say Japan does set the record. While the progress is slow going, the group hopes to improve the East Coast Trail's resiliency against severe weather in the future. Great global goal.
Yeah, no kidding, and good for them. That is hard work. You can see how physical that is. Wow.
And I'm sure it means a lot to the people who live in that area after being devastated by the storms.
Absolutely.
Brings them pride.
Yeah, especially you have people coming from Japan.
That's right. Thanks for watching.
Have a great night.